Yeah, the other group, I mean, they've got a pair of older, of 12, of anywhere from, I think, 12 to 13, 14-year-old. That pair's the older pair. I would expected them to go first. But we've seen a little more courtship on this end over here than we have, over there. And that other facility is about 2 hours north of me, so I don't know how much we just might be a couple of weeks off from breeding, being a little further south here. The gators down south are probably going to go a little earlier than the ones up north. So that might be an issue too. So until we go through a full year of it to see how they're acting, there's a little bit of ego, a little bit of a race between the two facilities to see who can who can do it. I mean, I'd love for us both to do it at the same time. That would be great. But that's just the way it goes. A bunch of reptile guys, we're all all trying to do it first. Well,
all right, BT, you ready to talk some genetics with Greg Graziani?
Yep, I'm ready, man.
All right, Greg, we want to talk to you about genetics, and we want to start off with some basic genetic talk. Basically what we're talking about, is how genes are passed down from parents, to the offspring. And then we want to work into some more advanced stuff with, all the different types of albinism and hidden genes and diluted genes and that type of stuff. And you've actually hit on some of the het marker stuff I wanted to talk to you about. But, it's not, when I talked to you before, I mean, your big thing is, that we know so little when it comes to genetics. But basically, we want to get as much as we can get out of you in the time that we have you now. And I know that we can't get much in the short amount of time, but we definitely want to give it a go. So we want to start off with, go ahead, I'm sorry.
One of the things I can direct any of the listeners to that want to check it out, as we're talking or whatever, if you go to my website, you can go to the glossary, and I have come up with a huge genetic glossary. And throughout it, these aren't, unlike some other books and things that have been published, these aren't definitions that I made up. I actually cite which genetic textbook or which book that the genetic definition came up with. And a lot of them, there might be 2 or 3 definitions, because sometimes, depending on what circles, even through the genetics world, they use the definitions differently. So I've given multiple definitions so that people can be on the same page. But it's probably, if you print it out, it's probably about 13 pages long. So, I mean, it's huge, but it's just something that, people, or if they hear us talking about something that they don't understand, it's a place that people can go and research this stuff for those that want it. For a lot of people, it's just going to be, way over their head and not something they want to waste their time with, but I'm kind of a nut about that, so that's something we've added to the site. So, you can, from any page, you can just go up to the top and click the glossary off of our website and check that out. That'll give you a lot of information to help you out with those terms.
Fantastic. Well, for those of you that are listening along, then make sure you go over there and check it out so you can follow along and hit on some of those terms. Try to keep Greg from talking too far over our heads tonight. But basically, we want to start right off with, how the basic way, because I know I'm sure that there's much more than we know when it comes to passing genes down from parents to offspring.
Right. Well, what you're going to get from the parents is you've got each parent has basically 2 sets of genes, and they have to give one or the other. And that's just the easiest way to think of it. And 2 sets, if both sets are normal, then it doesn't matter. They're gonna give off one normal gene either way. If they've got a simple recessive trait in there, and they carry the wild type gene, then they have to give off one or the other. Where on the simple recessive animals, if they're homozygous, then they only carry the recessive gene, so that's all they can give. If they're heterozygous, and that's a term that's thrown around a lot, you hear hets, and that's what that refers to as heterozygous. That's simply an animal that on that allele carries 2 different genes, and it gives one or the other. And that's basically, the more genes you add, we figure this out using a Punnett square. And every time you add a gene, we have to multiply that square by 4. So that's why your odds, you start out with a 1 in 4, you go to a 1 in 16, and then you multiply that up. You want to get 11 genes, and you're looking at, a 1 in 4 million to whatever. It's a ridiculous number. And that's just that's as far as I went, was 11, just to, get an idea years ago. The fact that we have probably somewhere around 50 or 60 base mutations, if you multiplied, all the way up times 4, 50 times. I don't know what, I don't know we have a calculator that would reach that high on the possibilities of combinations or genetic combinations that could be out there. So it does get ridiculous.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. You say allele. Explain to me what an allele is.
The allele is the point where the genetic information is. And there's, in ball pythons, I don't know that anybody's figured it out. I don't know how many different alleles there possibly are. But when we talk about things like all these things that are compatible, that are making these white snakes, when you get into the blue-eyed leucistics,
right,
theoretically, all of that information is at the same allele. When you breed a black-eyed leucistic into that, the reason you don't get a white snake is because allelically they don't line up. Picture rungs on a ladder. You've all seen that spinning DNA that looks like rungs on a ladder. And if you split that down the center and those rungs had to line up to make the white snake, the Mojave and the lesser are allelically in the same spot. And so when they line up, it creates that white snake. If you did the same thing with a black-eyed leucistic and a blue-eyed leucistic, those alleles wouldn't line up, and therefore you would get a normal pigmented snake. It wouldn't be totally normal because we know it would be a lesser and a fire mix or whatever the other blue-eyed leucistic portion was, but you would get a fully patterned snake because of that. That was one of the hardest things for me to grasp when I first got into genetics in the late 80s, was when they came out with the two different albino boas that weren't compatible. And I couldn't get that through my head. I'm like, you've got a snake with no melanin and a snake with no melanin. Where do all these normal colored babies come from? Who's throwing that extra paint in there to get that in there? And once I got it through my head, it's kind of switches that are turned off and on. And both of them have to be turned on to get that albino. Otherwise, you get that, pigment that shows up in there. So it's
why is it that, how can it be that two genes, will sit on the same allele, but they'll produce two different looking offspring? They're two genes, but they have different, they're different looking animals.
Talking about like the Mojave and the lesser?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and again, all we have here is theory, because nobody has done the chemical research or the DNA research to know exactly. One of the theories I have on that is that all of those white-producing snakes are basically the same mutation with possibly different protein levels showing different levels of coloration, because all the patterns are similar on those animals. They all have that lateral blushing. They all have those clear bellies. They all of that. The head pattern is almost identical from a Mojave to a lesser. As a matter of fact, you get people that get dark lessers that almost look Mojave-ish and light Mojaves that almost look lesser-ish. And to me, those animals are basically, we've already pretty much proven that allelically they line up because of the super forms when they get together. But if there's different protein levels in those animals, that's going to give you different shades. But the protein levels don't change. In other words, the lesser, it's enough of a difference that you can pick the Mojave from the lesser out. And you can pretty much do it, 99% of the time. You might get that one animal that you're not sure which way it goes. But, it's kind of like pastels. You might get that one ugly pastel jungle, you can't tell whether it's normal or not. But those are rare. For the most part, you can pick out all the pastels from the normal. And the same on that. And again, that's just a theory that I have. I by no means have a degree in genetics,